turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold, streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's so I remember I share and subscribe. Join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and I've had another insanely busy week. We are counting down to MidWest WeirdFest right now. It's this Friday, March 1st to Sunday, March 3, including those dates at the Micon Downtown Cinema in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And it is just packed with paranormal documentaries, weird offbeat stories, horror films, sci-fi, fantasy, and it's a heck of a ride. It's so much fun. So many filmmakers come in. We're a lovely, intimate festival where you get to meet the filmmakers, where you get to see their film, you get to listen to the Q&As afterwards, and you get to hang out with them if you want to in the lobby or in the bar or wherever you may go. We're a very social festival, and it's such a great time. And I'm really delighted about a lot of films, but as I was telling the filmmaker in the green room, this film, because we have a guest filmmaker on night, this film might be the most perfect fit, or one of the most perfect fits for Midwest WeirdFest that I've ever screened there. It encapsulates so well the initial mood of weirdness that I wanted to evoke when I launched the festival 8 years ago now. Geez, time flies. Anyway, I'll jump right into it because I want to bring him on to talk to you all. And he was born and raised in the Black Country, West Midlands, but now residing in Worcestershire. Tonight's guest has been passionate about films and filmmaking from as far back as he can remember. In 2017, he made the acclaimed docu-horror Bella in the Witch Elm, which examined a local unsolved murder which has become world-known folklore. He works for Black Country boutique label Treasured Films, producing extra features for Blu-ray releases, and writes about horror and occult films for collectors magazines such as We Belong Dead and websites such as We Are Cult. In 2023, he participated in the feature anthology Video Shop Tales of Terror, directing the segment These Burnt Children. His latest feature, which I was just mentioning, the Pocket Film of Superstitions, continues his love for archaic and feverish cinematic styles, which take their cues from the silent era through to the 1970s. And it's such a spectacular film, and I hope you can get along to MidWest WeirdFest to see it, because it's absolutely amazing. Anyway, I'm so delighted to welcome to Talking Weird Tom Lee Rutter.
Hey, how we doing?
Man, I'm doing really well because I'm getting to talk to you. And this is the first day I've got to chat to you. We were talking a little bit before the show, but your film is so spectacular and brings back so many memories of the type of books that I was raised on as a child, which forever launched my interests in the weird and the paranormal. And maybe that's an interesting jumping off point. We'll come back to some other things in a minute, but can you talk about which is the obvious influence of films like those Usborne books on the unknown and on the supernatural? Because to me, it felt like delving back into the books that, obsessed me as a child and forever launched me on this kind of path.
Dean, it's absolutely that. Yeah. I mean, when we were kids, it was actually these three big volume of books called The Unexplained, which were omnibus editions of a magazine called Unexplained. And, it had everything. Those pictures of the supposed spontaneous early combustion victims, where you see the charred legs of an old lady by the fireplace, and and then obviously the George Adamski UFO photographs, Borley Rectory, stuff like that. This was really freaking us out as kids, but we were so fascinated by it. So fascinating. And you don't forget those, those moments when you're reading all about these great Fortean mysteries and the paranormal. And it's something that's really stayed with me ever since, the idea of the unknown, paranormal. I just love it. I love the unknown because, when you can't 100% prove anything, that means you can't say anything is impossible. So
there's a wonderful kind of end note at the end of the film, which suggests that, science can only shine the light on so many things. And there's so much that we don't know still, which I think's a wonderful part of the film. The whole film is wonderful, but back to the books. I remember when I was a kid, and again, it was the Usborne, the omnibus of their three books, which was it was monsters, UFOs, and ghosts. And I don't know, I was probably about 10, and one Christmas I got a hardcover book, and I remember it was inscribed by my mother and father to me. And the stories in there, they fascinated me, but they terrified me as well. Like the tale of Jeff the Talking Mongoose isn't really something you probably maybe not shouldn't read when you're 10, and there's tales of this ghostly mongoose like peeking through holes in the ceiling and biting people, and just the high strangeness, weirdness. I'm not sure if kids are exposed probably to some things they shouldn't be today, but I don't think they get this kind of weird injection of the supernatural and the paranormal quite the way that we did as children in the 70s and 80s.
Now, did your parents believe in all this stuff as well? When they kind of passed down these books to you, were they into all that as well?
That's a good question. It's funnily enough, my mother visited for Christmas, which was lovely because she hadn't been here for 5 years. She's still based in Australia. And we did an episode of Talking Weird where I talked about those kind of things. And I remember as a child, it wasn't that my parents were into the weird and the paranormal and UFOs and the like, probably as I am, but there were always strange family stories, which remind me in many ways of very much of your film as well. One of the things that bothered me terribly as a child, and it reminds me of the books and the film, was that we had, and we talked a little bit about this on the show, me and my mum, we had a handyman, because my old man, who was quite handy himself, was also often away. Originally he was a naval engineer, but then he got into the computing world in the private sector, and he was often away on business. So we had a handyman for when my old man was away and on overseas trips, and he was still in the Navy Reserve, so he was often gone with them. So we had a handyman, but he was apparently a psychic. And I remember him telling us there's a body buried under the house here. When I was probably like 6 or 7 or 8. And he said where it was in the bathroom, there were tiles. I'm sure it was pareidolia now, but there were tiles in the bathroom, of different colors and shapes. And there was a couple that looked very much like human faces. And they would terrify me as a child when I looked at those. And because this is the location where the handyman said the bodies were buried. But there was one other story which I always thought was family folklore, and it's very much like one of the early stories in the book. I was told as a child multiple times that one of our relatives years and years ago, something would happen to her at night and they weren't sure what it was. They would find all these wet footprints and muddy footprints in the house leading to a bed. They didn't know what was going on. Anyway, they stayed up one night and watched her, and she got up out of bed and she walked out of the house and she walked to, I guess in Australia it would be called a billabong, maybe here it would be a small lake or something like that. And she went swimming. Now, as a child, I always believed, this as an adult, I thought it was family folklore, but then supposedly they called out to her while she was swimming and she woke up from her somnambulistic state and drowned. Now, as I got older, I thought that's just a total nonsense story. Anyway, when I was moving to America, just shortly before, my mother found the news clipping of the story from like, I don't know, like 100-year-old newspaper, 80-year-old newspaper that the family had kept. And sure enough, the story was there. Not that you can believe everything you read, but at the time, certainly it was a genuine news story. So what I thought was I grew up was this was just a family fantasy. No, it actually happened. This woman went, according to the newspaper, she went walking. People yelled at her when she was swimming and drowned. And you have something very common, very similar to that in the early part of the film. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that's part of our superstitious culture and apparently part of reality sometimes. In my family tales are to be believed.
It is. It's strange. I think because there's so much the brain is doing whilst you're asleep. It's giving you all these answers. For me, dreams are exactly like art because art's all about puzzles, and so the brain is telling you, is giving you something, but it's telling you in puzzles, isn't it? So it's all very symbolic, and you wake up and you're kind of working out this brain puzzle in your mind. But when you start sleepwalking and stuff, this is an whole new level, isn't it? It's so bizarre. But to me, it was all about just creating that ethereal sense of a dream state, a state in between, lucidity and completely going off the deep end. And that was a sort of, the point I wanted to strike there. And then I thought, right, okay, that's going to put us on the level now. And this is how the film's going to take us in. And that's hopefully going to stay there. I truly believe in the in-between states. I want to explore those feelings because it's all intuition, and I felt that's what was driving me with this film, is the sense of intuition and the intuitive feelings that you do feel when you're half asleep or in a dream state. For me, that's what that's all about. Going back to the family thing, I'm from the Black Country, as you previously said. Now that's, the heart of the Industrial Revolution from back in the day with the coal mines and the chain makers, and they're very salt of the earth people, but also very superstitious. I mean, my mom, she loved all those books. The reason we were reading them is because my mom wanted to read them to us, and so Borley Rectory and all that was all fantastic. My mom reading. But as a result, they got very, very salt of the earth people who, like my dear Nana, who very recently passed away. I mean, the film is dedicated to her at the end. She would, bring you back down to earth with a bit of a slap around the face, stop being so silly. But then she'd go on and talk about how her friend communes with this ghost in this pub that she used to clean at. It was very matter of fact. To them, it was just part of nature. There's this commonality of ghosts existing, It's so strange. I think and my other Nana who's still with us, I think some of those Victorian values are sort of still passed down from their sort of generation. I mean, when my granddad passed away, she took a photo of him in his coffin and then put it in the family album.
Oh my goodness!
So my little cousin would be looking through the family album. Oh, there's granddad in his coffin,
Gosh.
So the love for the spookiness and the unknown, it's very much ingrained in what I'm all about, So the film was completely just all about celebrating that.
And we were talking about liminal spaces, or these spaces in between dream and sleep and real and unreal. And your film does a magical job of capturing that. It's hypnotic. It's almost mesmerizing. It feels in many ways like a dream. And I think part of that's, and you can tell me how you did it, because you pulled it off amazingly, how you thought to do it. But one of those things that I'll start us off with is that sepia but blue tone type of sepia. Like it's black and white, so it's not sepia tone, which is an orangey, but it's like a blue tone monochrome even monochrome might be the wrong term, but you can tell me the term. But it's this blue tint the whole film, which feels like you're in this alternative dream state. Like it just sucks you in, and I think your brain almost clicks to a different level while you're watching it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think the gamble was that if I was to create this parameter, right? So the parameter is it's all blue, blue and black and white and blue. So therefore it has a uniformity. And then underneath that uniformity, I've got this boundless sort of freedom of expression and creativity where I can cut to anything I want, go anywhere I want. I can do whatever the hell I want to with this film, but it all has that uniformity and it has the narrator kind of string us through. I love experimental film. I love, I love experimenting with things, but I'm always aware that, you can't alienate your audience at all. I really wanted to welcome people in and create a sense of warmth and humanity. And instead of, the film's a love letter about people, but their weirdest traits and beliefs. And, so for me, it was the gamble of being able to just film so many different disparate elements, bring it all together under this kind of, bluey sort of dreamy like tone. Because I guess when you watch silent films, when everything's set at night, they'll give it a blue tint, or if someone's dreaming or something, they'll always bring the blue in as though you saw the color of moonbeams and stuff like that. Well, that's that romanticism that I love, so bring all that in. And it's funny you say that, how it kind of brings, puts people on a strange kind of sort of mindset, ready to kind of be eased into it. Someone actually messaged me after watching the film at one of the festivals it screened at, saying she can't explain why, but she has some sort of sensory thing going on where it really just made her feel so at ease, and she loved it so much. She said, for that, I thank you, because it's so beautiful. And it pleases me to no end,
You know what else adds to it? I think that's definitely part of it. Another component is the narration and the narrator. So maybe let's talk about the narrator first, and then we'll get down to the things he says. But tell us how you selected the narrator, and tell us a little bit about him, because his voice is pitch perfect for this movie.
Oh yeah, the Shen's a living legend. He's quite the cult icon, really. I mean, so I made my earlier film Bella and the Witch Elm with a narrator, and I fell in love with that style of filmmaking, because not only was it the sort of economical thing and also a sort of necessity, because I was working full time. So I needed to start making films where I could just do fragmented shoots and then have a narrator glue it all together, rather than have character walk into scene A, then scene B, then scene C, because then you realise there might be 2 years between scene A and scene B, and his hair might suddenly...
Tell me about
it. Yeah, exactly. So I was really on this kick, and I thought, I want to start making films with narrators and this sort of vignetted sort of approach. And, the idea of finding a new narrator, it was just always going to be quite a daunting task, because in your head you go straight to people who you on your wish list, someone like, say, Tom Baker, who, my favorite Doctor Who.
I met Tom back in the day, by the way.
Really?
Properly met him. And my father ran a computer company in Australia, I was mentioning before, and they employed Tom Baker as Doctor Who to do their ad campaign, Prime Computers. And they employed the Leela as well. And they flew him to Australia as his publicity campaign. And I was a massive fan. It was when Baker he was still Doctor Who. So he was still the Doctor. And me and my brother met him. We got taken to my father's office. He was in the room alone. And when we walked in, I was probably, I don't know, maybe, sorry to cut into, but this is too good a story not to mention, since we mentioned Baker. I don't know how old I would have been, 8-ish maybe. My brother was 4 years younger. He probably was about 4. We both watched Doctor Who. Tom Baker knelt down in front of my brother and literally said this, "I know you. You watch me on the television." Can you imagine Tom Baker telling you that when you were 4 to my brother?
Wow. I mean, I met him at a convention. It was nowhere near as special as that, but he did give me a jelly baby, so I was quite.
Well, that's pretty special. Anyway, sorry. So back to wish list, because yes, Tom Baker would be great. I love Baker, but I think who you got was perfect. But let's go back to the
Shen was absolute. So this was like before the Shen sort of came into my orbit, sort of thing. So he's in a he was actually from a town neighbouring the town I live in now, Kidderminster, who's in Redditch, and they formed a band in the late 70s called the Cravats. So they were like this kind of jazz fused punk band. So it was very Dadaist in approach. So that sort of silly sense of humor was carried over into these full throttle punk tunes, and with all these crazy jazz elements and like sort of tape manipulation. And they were signed by Crass Records, and they put out an EP with them. He ended up realizing that because he was in a band, he could get an equity card. So he got into acting. So he went down to London and started appearing in pretty much every sitcom you ever seen, like Red Dwarf, Men Behaving Badly, Know Me, Know You, Alan Partridge. And he started doing film appearances. And, you know, he did really well for himself. They started another band in the 80s called The Very Things, who released a great tune called The Bushes Scream While My Daddy Prunes. So, you know, it's very much that sort of Dadaist philosophy, you know, but with great rock and roll. I mean, they were like a punk version of, say, the Bonzo Dog Doodah band, you know. I mean, that's where I was coming from as well. I love for the Python-esque and the Bonzo Dog Doodah band. So the Shend embodied all of that himself, and they happened to be gigging locally. So we went to see him play, and I watched him play, and, you know, just his banter in between tunes. Afterwards, I had to listen to his radio show because he does a radio show, a weekly one. And I just thought, this guy, I love his voice so much. It's what we call a toffee voice, you know. It's one that you can really chew on, you know. Right. And I just thought, yeah, you know what? I'm going to email him and just and see what the Shen thinks. So I emailed him, and we had a bit of a to-and, you know, back and forth for quite a while, actually, because in the midst of all this, COVID kicked off. So it was a case of how am I going to, you know, get this sort of in the bag, because it turns out he lives down in Brighton now, so he's no longer local. So I ended up just we ended up just kind of, you know, agreeing what was going to happen and how we were going to do things. I don't think he realised it was a feature, because when I sent him the script, he was like, "Blooming heck, there's 11 pages of it," you know. But one thing I loved about it was he hadn't narrated anything before, which was quite shocking to me, really. But so it was great that I was able to give him something, you know, different to do as well. That because he's a guy that wears many hats anyway. So this was just another one, you know, feather in his cap sort of thing, you know, another string to his bow, so to speak. So I ended up just buying him a mic, mailing it down to him. I sent him the narration, the whole narration, but I had to just color code it, annotate it. This one's a lot more sort of, you know, silly, so you can be a bit more humorous with this one. This one's very somber, so we need you to be a bit more serious. So yeah, it was a case of just, you know, I think we only did literally 1 page of retakes as well. And the mad thing was he hadn't seen any of the footage. I think I sent him one scene, because let's face it, I hadn't filmed all of them at this point. So I think he saw the ladder scene with the ladder, and so he got an idea.
That's a funny scene. That's so good.
Thank you. Yeah, so he gave me like a sort of test, you know, a test demo on that scene, and I said, "Yeah, you know what? I think you're going to work out a treat."
we have to talk about the ladder as well, but let's talk about the Shent more first. He owns that narration so incredibly. And by the way, kudos to you as a filmmaker for thinking of him to do it, because after I've seen that film, I can't imagine another voice narrating this movie.
Likewise.
He owns it so much that I almost imagined that some of it, and I might be wrong by what you just told me, but some of it felt like ad-libbing, but not in a bad way. Like he seemed to own that narration so much. It seemed to almost come from a personal place. But maybe that's just the talent of your writing and his ability to act it. It's like I've never heard a narrator own a piece as much as I've heard the narrator own this piece.
Oh, he's going to be so chuffed to hear that. Funnily enough, it was pretty much word for word. I don't think there was much. I don't think there was much in terms of ad-libbing, really, because I think he realised that, you know, I've got to get through so many pages of this. I'm just going to deliver it as is. But he just brought his own kind of inimitable style to it, you know, and just his general pronunciation. And I when I was writing that, then I thought I want to write words to get him to say, you know, like kind of cozy wozy humble abode stuff. Stuff like this, stuff that I can just picture him saying. I thought, you know, very much writing in that sort of, keeping in mind people like Viv Stanshaw and, you know, these sort of kind of comedic wordsmiths and the like. So no, it was pretty much word for
Wow.
word. I do believe, yeah.
Well, bravo to you as a filmmaker and a writer, and we'll get to some specific superstitions because I think our audience will dig that, including the latter one that we spoke about. But maybe let's start by looking at how did you track down the superstitions? Like, what were your sources to put all of them together? Because the movie has, I don't know, dozens, hundreds, superstition after superstition after superstition, all of them fascinating, all of them drawing you in with the images and the narration that we just talked about, the music, the rest of the film. It does it wonderfully. But how did you decide on the superstitions and where did you get them from?
So I always wanted to keep it a sort of a stream of consciousness quality to the film. I didn't want it to be an anthology because there's, I've been involved in anthologies and I was very conscious not to make it a sort of anthology style. I wanted it more as a vignette, stream of consciousness style. How many superstitions can we cram into this film? So I had two books. One of them was a lot more kind of broad, whereas like one of them, I've actually got them here for reference.
Oh,
so
nice.
This one's a more recent one called the Encyclopedia of Superstitions by Richard Webster. That was a lot more broader in scope. So, they have ones that are just about ghosts, witches. So to me, that's like there's so many different kind of categories amongst those. But perhaps the most beautiful one, which I wanted to emulate more so, was this one here, this Ian M.A. Radford Encyclopedia of Superstitions. It's got a gorgeous cover.
Nice.
Where the whole wraparound is just all these magical creatures, mythical sort of, and that's the sort. This has got loads of odd ones in there. There's one here for onions, horseshoes.
I'm gonna buy that and add it to my library because it looks fantastic. I'll watch this.
Oh, you must.
I'll get the notes. I'm a sucker for ordering books like that. But yes,
this is definitely the one. This is definitely the one. And I think it was then a case of scanning through these, and for me, it was all about picking possibly the most, the most bizarre ones, really, because I always kept in the back of my mind the idea of how to visualize these scenarios, and I think. But then what I did was I also looked at some specifically Midlands based, because here I am in the West Midlands. I thought, okay, let's find some Midlands based superstitions. So the one I want to talk about really is the baking of the dumb cake on the eve of St. Agnes, which is apparently a Midlands superstition, So obviously St. Agnes was the patron saint for virgins. She was a very tragic character who was killed by the Romans, so the idea of the superstition is on the eve of St. Agnes, three sisters would gather and bake a cake in silence. They wouldn't speak. And then when they bake this cake, they would, each take a slice, eat it, then walk up to their bedchambers backwards, undoing their nightshirts. And then by the time they get to their bedroom, an apparition of their future husband would appear and then chase them around the bed.
That's such a great scene.
And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, wow, just wow, I've got to visualize this. So for me, it was all about if it would make for a strange, quirky scene, then some of these things came fully realized. I didn't have to really put much thought into some of those. They were just gifts offering themselves up to me. I love dipping into source texts, especially folkloric ones. And that ones like that in particular were really quite magical, and the sort of the lesser known ones as well, because I suppose you've got to have a broad spectrum of the obvious, but also the not so obvious. So it was kind of keep maintaining a sort of balance between the two, really. And what I'd do was I'd just end up kind of making a list of all the superstitions that I thought of, and I just sort of instinctively stopped at that point because as you can imagine, this could have gone on forever and ever and ever. But then it was a case of how does this lead into that, then how does that lead into this, and then how does that lead into that. So I thought, well, okay, so I'm creating more and more work for myself. I just need to know when to stop, really.
I think it works well, that flow of consciousness, like you were talking about. But I teased, we're going to talk about a few of them because I can't help myself. But we teased the walking under the ladder one, and I think most people, I don't know if kids today know or not. We'll talk about that in a minute as well, whether superstitions are being lost or not, the importance of folklore and remembering them. But there is a funny scene. You were talking about the Shent narrating it before, and that is walking under a ladder. Now, I think most people know, at least in my generation, maybe still today, they know that walking under a ladder is meant to be bad luck. But the film also talks about the ways that you can, in a very humorous scene, in the ways that you can counter that bad luck. Maybe you could tell me how you found out about that and tell me a little bit about what those countering methodologies or methods are.
It's funny, really, because when you research these, I mean, as in most, I suppose the nature of most folklore is you get conflicting sort of, bits of information for each part you read, like 3 or 4 different entries that talk about that will give you something slightly different. So I found myself in a position where I'm like, well, how kind of, how to the point of, being as correct as possible do I want to be with this, and how much artistic license do I have? So, where does it actually become a problem if people come up to me going, hang on, and that's not right. So, the amount of like articles you read, they've all got very different ideas. It was funny when I read about how it was potentially something that stemmed from the sort of Holy Trinity, with it creating a sort of triangular sort of, again, ancient Egyptian with the Osiris and, the Trinity of gods, basically. So when I read again the detail of you having to reverse backwards, there's a lot of backwards stuff going on in this. Such a common thread, walking backwards. To reverse it, you walk backwards under the ladder in reverse, and then you stop, count yourself back in, start walking forward in front of the ladder, but then you have to spit 3 times through a rung of the ladder, and then you cross your fingers like this, and then carry on walking, and you carry on keeping those fingers crossed until you come across a dog, which is exactly what I read,
Amazing.
So that had to be visualized. So when you see a dog, you can uncross the fingers and get on with your day. A cleansed soul.
I love how you said you were worried about taking heat, maybe, or you knew you would take heat, because that scene immediately afterwards is, I mean, it's a total laugh out loud moment, at least for me, where you talk about another bad luck superstition, and that is stepping on a crack. And of course, there's a song I know, "Step on a Crack, Break Your Mother's Back." But you say all the problems of stepping on a crack, and one of the things you say is because when you step on a crack, you'll kill a fairy instantly, because there's these ideas of how you kill a fairy. And of course, then you turn around and you say, just joking, I made that one up. Or Shent says, just joking, made that one up.
Yeah.
You know, it's your words.
Well, it's funny because, again, that one was very much ingrained in our sort of daily rituals. I mean, I find myself kind of dodging cracks now and again when I'm walking along the street. But funnily enough, when I started reading to that one, some of the connotations surrounding that were actually quite racist. I mean, it was so bizarre, really, so that I thought, well, that's not really something I want to fall down and kind of open and unpack, because this is more of a celebration rather than a reminder of some of the more kind of dubious etymology. But so I thought, you know what, the way to kind of swerve that and kind of go around that is to bring in a bit of a rhyme and then just go completely just the other way and create something quite silly with it, so we can move swiftly on. It
still rings true, though. That, I mean, I know that's not the case. That I never heard you, but I know there are things which, I mean, I think the Peter Pan thing, right? For example, is if you don't believe in fairies are in jeopardy. Like, you have to believe in them. And I think I read somewhere that when people say they don't believe in fairies, a fairy dies. So it seemed to be, there was this intersection of superstitions. And to be honest, if you hadn't have made that caveat where you said, I'm just joking, I'm sure there would have been people who went, oh, I better not step on cracks anymore because I might kill a fairy. And perhaps that's the way some of these superstitions start, when they seem to ring true. I mean, walking under a ladder, to me, always, to a degree, I didn't know about the Osiris stuff and the Holy Trinity stuff that you mentioned here and in the film. But to me, I imagined, well, probably people have walked under ladders and it's collapsed on them. So then it becomes wise not to walk under a ladder, and then it becomes superstition. So I think that there's always that question of superstition: is this based on something that happened or something that didn't happen? And a superstition which I'd be fascinated to know whether it's based on something that happened or didn't happen. And maybe you can talk about it, because I never heard this before. And these are the ones
Well, it's funny.
Sorry, no, you go first, and then we'll get back to the.
No, it's okay. I'm just saying it's funny when you say that because, yeah, I mean, when you look at a lot of these superstitions, there are some quite obvious practical reasons why you wouldn't do a lot of these things. Like there's a bit with when the guy covers his mouth because he's yawning.
Right.
The narrator talks about the superstition behind it, but then he also mentions it's also because it's hygienic. So that's the obvious one.
And shoes on the table in the coal miner situation as well.
Yeah,
well,
that's another one. You see, it is bad luck. But the strange thing about that one, yet again, I couldn't find a solid sort of origin for it. So the one about the miners to me was like, well, that sort of fits. You know, that would seems. But I think it goes way earlier than that. You know, like most of them would, I guess. Really, it's an odd one. I couldn't really find a concrete sort of origin for it, so I settled on the one that seemed to fit right for me. You know, that I'd think, well, that seems like it about right, really. You know, a sort of ritualistic placing of the shoes on the table when a miner dies, and you know,
yeah.
So
it's bad luck if the miner hasn't died and you just put but it would also, I assume, conceivably be bad luck to put dirty shoes on the table because of the hygiene levels.
Yeah, exactly. The practical
levels
reasons make so much more sense because you're going to eat your dinner off that. But I think the other one connotation was when obviously someone is laying in a coffin on the table. You know, so when people come in to view their loved one who's just recently passed, because you're seeing their shoes upright on a table essentially. So I think that was part of that as well.
Good point.
So I just sort of mixed them in. But I think some scenes, like the ladder scene, it is how many different superstitions can you put in one scene? You know, like the lady with the evil eye. So it's the evil eye temptress who causes the guy to walk under the ladder. Then he walks onto the crack. So it's like, right, we're kind of doubling up on our superstitions now, you know.
And you're clever enough to reference that. After you've hit the evil eye a couple of times, you're like, oh, we've already done the evil eye. I mean, that's not the exact phraseology, but it's a reference to, it's already popped up in other superstitions.
That's because what I found was because these sequences didn't sit back to back. So later on in the film, they started cross referencing. I was like, oh, hang on a minute. How am I going to get around this? Because this one is essentially about the evil eye, but we've done that. So let's just create this little throwaway gag to get around it, you know.
It's so clever. I love the superstitions, like you talked about the dumb bread baking before that, or it was cake or bread, whatever. Anyway, there was another one I never heard about, which I was fascinated about. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about the origins and how you found this one. And maybe it's native to your part of the world. And that is when you can't pick nuts or go gather nuts at a certain time because it's the devil's day or something.
The devil's nutting day, yeah. That is one that is, I believe, in this book. In this one here. So that one is actually again, I think it's one of those that maybe changes slightly in detail depending on the region you're in or something like this, because funnily enough, it's amazing how many different bits of folklore are attached to certain like kind of parts of the map, but then you go up the road to another and then you read exactly the same story regarding that, and I think this was one of those really where it's essentially the same, but slightly different depending on your region. But yeah, there's a certain day in September when you go picking hazelnuts, is the devil's nutting day. So, you'll see the devil out with his nutting bag. I mean, it sounds pretty, it sounds pretty dubious in itself, but I love that idea of the devil's there with his big satchel collecting all these hazelnuts. And we happen to have a sort of hazelnut sort of bridal way grove not far from here, so I just needed to kind of catch the season right, because some of these were so seasonally dependent on the season. So I needed someone in the know to tell me, are the hazelnuts here yet? And then we went over and found all these hazelnuts, but the squirrels had all got to them, most of them. So when you look in the film carefully, a lot of them have been eaten out by squirrels.
Huh. That's hilarious. And we'll talk about the devil and his relation to this film and folklore in a moment. But just on the subject of nut gathering and the devil will appear again, I wonder if some of these superstitions, as we said, maybe they have a practical basis, like walking under a ladder, it falls on you, you get sick from eating on a table where dirty shoes have been placed. But there is an ongoing, if you look into encounters of humans with non-humanoids, there are an awful lot of very strange experiences when people have encounters when they're picking fruits or berries or nuts. It's very weird. Like when you look at a lot of humanoid encounter reports, the amount of people who encounter something non-human, a humanoid that isn't human when they're picking things. So I wonder if some of these are based on some genuine paranormal phenomenon, which us in the modern, science is king world just dismiss as crazy. I wonder if some of them are based on some unknown Fortean phenomenon or phenomena that the modern world just has essentially forgotten or ignores.
It does make you wonder. I think it does bring in the whole cryptid thing into play, doesn't it? I mean, I think around here we have a lot of talk on big cats, big cats sightings, and so that's one of the ones we get over here. But yeah, that's a very interesting point, actually. It's revolving around people picking things or out gathering things, and then they come across something that shouldn't exist. I love that. Yeah, maybe that's my next step.
Well, speaking about big cats, funnily enough, again, you're screening at the perfect festival. One of the most, she's passed now, one of the most famous Fortean writers in America was Linda Godfrey, and we were fortunate enough to do the world premiere of her feature debut, which was a documentary called Return to Wildcat Mountain at the festival a few years ago. And we had Linda there, and she spoke at a side event, and she presented the film, and she had wonderful Q&A where witnesses of black cat sightings were also there in the audience, because in an area to the west of me called the Driftless area, which is essentially where, when the glaciers moved through here and flattened the rest of Wisconsin, there's an area where they didn't, and it's still quite, hilly and mountainy and valley-ish. There's all kinds of weird Fortean phenomena in the Driftless area. One of them is big black cat sightings, much like what you have in the UK. Because it's a big thing in the UK, black cat sightings.
It is, yeah, and it's quite remarkable, really, how this one seems to travel so far as well, like you're saying, over there as well. I mean, I think over here, it's like, funnily enough, up the road from where we are here, we have a safari park, So it's funny, we go to a nature reserve called the Rifle Range Reserve. And in the middle of this Rifle Range Reserve is this big rock called the Devil's Spittleful. Now the funny thing about the Devil's Spittleful is there's a story regarding that. There's a little post, a little kind of a post at the foot of the mound of the rock, and it's about this the shoemaker who was passing through on his way to Bewdley, and the devil stopped him in his tracks, and apparently he put that big rock there just so he could flood out the pious people of Bewdley in the neighbouring town.
Oh wow!
But the funny thing is, when you go up the road and, you go more into the Black Country, and there's another kind of big sort of hill mound area called the Wrekin. And when you go to the Wrekin, the story attributed to the Wrekin is exactly the same one. But anyway, so on sitting on top of Devil's Spittleful, you will see and hear the roaring of lions, and then you'll see the elephants. So it's very
reserve.
Yeah. So on the left hand side, you've got our steam railway, the Severn Valley Railway, which is the railway that you see in Pocket Film. So on the left hand side, you've got the Severn Valley Railway with these old steam engines coming back and forth. And then on the right, you've got the safari park, so you've got the roaring of lions. Wow. It's a very strange place to be. So it's very possible that, now and again, a cat might kind of get on the loose and escape.
Well, that's the story here as well, because Wisconsin has had, I don't know if it still does, but traditionally it's had very liberal laws when it comes to the ownership of big cats. So the theory, of course, is, well, somebody's released black panthers in the area, but the UK has similar versions like what you just told me. And I think there was even similar stories in Australia, if I recall. It seems to me this out of place big cat phenomenon to perhaps not be a biological, zoological, cryptozoological manifestation, but something far weirder. But that's because I leaned to the weird. But you came back then talking about an area called, and what was it again? The Devil's What was that?
Spittlefall.
Spittlefall. I've never heard. What's a Spittlefall?
A spittlefall or spadefall is essentially just like a sort of, well, to my knowledge, in here in Kidderminster, it's just a big rock, like a sort of a big sort of hill, like mound of rock, that's got trees spurting out of it, and I mean, it's an odd one. It really is, because that story is most likely attributed to loads of different rocks. It's very true of the Wrekin, which is the big one in the Black Country, So it makes you wonder how many times they've applied this story to all these different sort of landmarks, these parts of the landscape.
Well, it's interesting.
Just to add a little bit of colour. Yeah,
John Keel talked about, normally if you look at a map or a geography and there's something named the Devil's Spittlefall or the Devil's Hill or Devil's Mountain or Devil's Lake, usually it's because there's some weird Fortean anomalous phenomenon attached to it. Like in Wisconsin, we have a Devil's Lake, for example. There's probably other devil's things, and in that area there was meant to have been, I guess, a lake monster, for lack of a better term, back in the day. There's a Native American story about a lake monster that lived in there. But let's channel the devil talk back to your film. I find it fascinating that while in the Bible, the devil is actually, he's very different to the devil of folklore, the devil of the Brothers Grimm stories, or the devil of, you were talking about now, of somebody having an encounter with a devil at Devil's Spittlefall, or the devil in your movie who appears behind people who spilt salt or goes and does other things. I guess I don't even know what the question is other than comment, but I'll ask you a question. How prevalent did you find when you were reading those books and researching that the devil is this kind of entity that plays around with us and is almost like, I don't know, like a trickster figure in some of these stories?
Yeah, he's very much the figure of mischief, isn't he? He's very much the mischievous, the very much the cause of mischief and misfortune, but in a very playful manner. It doesn't seem too sort of fundamentally bad. He just seems just a bit naughty.
It's comical, I think, almost.
Yeah, comical, very much. I think where I obviously wanted to take that from is one of my favorite films is Hexen from 1922. This film is a huge tribute to Hexen, because for me, Hexen is, it's the most diabolical film on celluloid, But the devil character in that is very much that mischievous sort of harbinger of mischief and I don't know, diabolical parties, I suppose. But the funny thing about that is that he was played by the director of the film, which added a very much meta-dimensional sort of mischief to that. Which, so I just thought that the devil has to be at the core of what's going on in this film. But we only had him for a day, which was great. So we got him up to Stourbridge to film that scene with the salt. But then I just had him sort of stood at the camera just doing all these faces. So
because he's in it quite a bit. He's a repeating character in the film.
And then we just had a little walk into the town just to find a tree somewhere. So I found a tree which was on the front of a churchyard, as it happened. And we just had him peer around this tree. And then 2 years later, I filmed the hazelnut scene. And the girls are running through the woods. So when you see the hand come from around the tree and point at the girl, that's my hand, because the devil wasn't there that day. So I've painted my hand grey, put some nails on it, and then I've done that where there's a tree, and then the points to the girls, because I had the devil point to the camera. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I'll have him point to somebody somewhere down the line. I just don't know when that's going to be yet. And then 2 years later, I filmed the girls looking at the camera screaming, and my hand comes into the frame like this, and then all of a sudden the devil's there.
That's fantastic.
The economy of filmmaking.
Well, you did. I mean, you did it brilliantly. It's funny that you talk about that kind of meta nature of Hexen having
Benjamin Christensen playing the devil.
Yeah, the devil, because we have our closing night film from Richard Elfman, who's the brother of Danny Elfman, and Richard Elfman founded Oingo Boingo, and Danny Elfman, of course, is one of my favorite composers and one of the most legendary composers
I adore Oingo Boingo.
Me too. Funny thing, when I ran big, festive, ridiculous carnival type Halloween parties at my house in Halloween, we would always be playing Oingo Boingo. It was one of our go-tos. But Richard Elfman plays the devil in Bloody Bridget. So he's the director of the film, and and I wonder if it's because of Hexen having that kind of effect.
I dare say that is probably true.
Because I didn't know until you told me that the director played the devil in
that's right. So I think it's a sort of very mischievous nod that the devil, i.e. the director, is the guy creating such mischief, creating all this sort of furore of mischievousness, for want of a better word. And I think it makes complete sense that they put themselves in that role. I think it's something I would do. But no, Forbidden Zone is actually one of my favourite films of all time. In fact,
the Richard Elfman
elements, the Richard Elfman film, because that to me was about, that was their sort of a filmic attempt to put the nature of the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo live shows on film, and it's like a living cartoon. And some of those mixtures of animation and live action is exactly where I'm coming from with Pocket Film. There's a scene with the sleepwalker where her soul is severed from the body, and her face is sort of this sort of kind of stop motion animation of her face screaming. That is completely taken from Forbidden Zone.
I'll have to send this to Richard and say, listen from 0.47 minutes on or something.
Huge fan.
The animation in the film is, I love it too. I love the human, well, I shouldn't say I love the human sacrifice scene. The lead up to that, where one of the black robed figures is walking. There's a Python-esque element to that as well, in that kind of animation of that figure walking, the black robed figure walking through various landscapes.
I mean, that and the birds, that was all my editing on Adobe Premiere. So I'm essentially taking paper cutouts and then but with the robe thing, that was again out of necessity, really, because I actually attempted to film myself walking past loads of landscapes, but I could the shots just never quite looked right. And I thought, you know what, this could be so much better if I just animated it. But a good story about the sacrifice scene. This was actually a folly in Wales, because as you can imagine, Wales has a lot of genuine stone circles, as does Cornwall and pretty much most places around in this country. But this was actually a folly which dated only back from like the 70s or something. It was actually outside a hotel. It was actually outside an old castle hotel. But because
just tell the audience what a folly is as well.
A folly, it's a sort of monument, or in this case, a stone circle that was actually put up very recently by either the owners of the castle or the local council for the means of recent celebrations, whereas it looks like it's ancient, but in fact it's not. So it's something that sometimes they just kind of erect these things just to kind of create a nice view from their window. Gotcha. So a folly is just. So this only dated back from the 70s. So therefore, it didn't really have many people flocking to it. So therefore, it was quiet. And
nice.
So we took our guys in the robes, and we had the plateau in the middle, which was perfect for the sort of sacrificial altar sort of thing. And that's what we did. But the best thing about that scene is that there was only 4 of us there. So you got the guy who was the victim, then you had me, and then you had 2 other guys. So every shot is me kind of filming things and then running into shot, standing by a
clever.
And then the master shot is actually, when you see all of them, is actually sectioned off into 4 shots. So the camera stays still. We inhabit this part of the frame, and then we all walk over to the next 3 stones, and we inhabit that frame. We all walk, and then I splice it all together, and then all of a sudden we have a whole congregation of hooded robes. I
never would have known. Such a great job.
Oh, it's full of so many little tricks. And I think, again, going back to the black and white with the blue tint thing, it sort of helps you mask all these seams. It's a great tool for filmmakers to express themselves with special effects and playing with environment and atmosphere, because black and white can just mask over so many things, And that was an example of that, where it worked, I guess.
Just amazing. I always love bird superstitions, and we'll maybe wind down on this. When I was testing the DCP, which is like the the digital cinema package, which I have to make to screen at the festival. I was testing the other night. I'm very careful with what I let my 8-year-old watch, because obviously most of the content of MidWest WeirdFest, including big swathes of your film, probably shouldn't be consumed by an 8-year-old, even though I was probably reading, Usborne's books, which were very similar at the same time. But the beginning's safe. And when she started to watch it, has the ducks at the beginning, is how the film opens with duck superstitions. And she was mesmerized because she loves birds. I was like, okay, that's enough before it moved on.
Oh,
but
bless.
But tell me a little bit about some of the bird superstitions in the film, because it starts with a duck one. There's magpie ones. There's swift ones. It's interesting how birds are such an integral part to the human belief in superstition.
I mean, I love how that became a sort of a thread, that would come in and out of the film. And these encyclopedias, I mean, they're full of bird superstitions. In fact, I'm annoyed I didn't include the obvious ones like the raven or the crow,
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to do that around the sort of cemetery area where we come into the ghosts, but we just had the swift. And the swift was an odd one because, I never kind of attributed anything strange to the swift, especially regarding the dead. And the way that they say that the bird song of the swift is the sound of these souls just leaving the earth, the earthly plane.
Uh-huh.
And I found that quite beautiful, really. And I couldn't help but start animating these birds, because it gave me an opportunity to kind of forward the film in my office, just working on my own, animating these birds, thinking about, trying to gather resources for the next live action shoot. I could start just animating away. But the ducks thing was a strange one, because I went on holiday to Budapest, and they have lots of these hot springs where you go to a park, and the water's just, the steam's just rising from the water. So I'm filming this hot spring, and all of a sudden these duck silhouettes just come into shot. And I thought, what a beautiful shot. That needs to open a film. I don't know what it's going to open yet, but someday I'm going to use that shot. And then, obviously, I started researching like superstitions involving ducks, because I figured I'm doing a film about superstition. How can I bring this duck shot into it? And that's when I started reading about the sort of, if you're dreaming of a duck's flying, it's carrying you into a dream state. So I thought that's perfect. And then I animated. So there's a bit where the duck comes into shot and then it flies off. Mm-hmm. So I sort of had to mask the shot into a shot where the duck wasn't there. Then I animated the duck flying off, and then that sort of started me on my journey of animating birds. Really.
Wow.
It's such a weird, satisfying thing to do. But the magpie one was probably the most ambitious, because that was me getting a lot more confident with layering up these sort of animated sequences. And obviously the magpies, the saluting of a magpie, it's very popular superstition. So many people salute magpies. They say, "Morning, Mr. Magpie," when they see a...
I'd never heard it before the film, but maybe...
Really?
Tell people about that. That's fascinating.
So if you were to see a magpie, singing a magpie, you're going to salute him. And you say, "Morning, Mr. Magpie," because that's going to put you in good stead for the rest of the day. But there's a rhyme regarding the nature of how many numbers of magpie you do see signifies either good fortune or loss or this and that. So, one for sorrow, two for joy. So you see 2 magpies, that's 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, and then 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, and so on and so on and so forth. And that's very much an old sort of folkloric sort of tradition.
So did that song that you have in the movie exist, or did you write the kind of the tones or the notes, the words?
Song? The words, they exist, but then because there's, again, going back to the nature of folklore, how details change depending on where you read it and who you speak to. So I wanted to bring attention to the fact that the lyrics change regarding to wherever you. So we thought we'd bring in both versions, but turn it into one song. So there's a bit in the middle where the bird flies past with a sign saying, "Others may say it like this," and then we go into an alternative version of the magpie rhyme.
So clever.
And it's beautiful. It's a lovely little. I mean, it was just too. So I animated it first in my, and then Craig Asbarry, my amazing composer, I asked him, we need a song for this, And I said, at this point, we're nearing the date of premiering this film, and we still haven't had a song for this magpie sequence. So I asked him, I said, "Look, even if you have to scratch something out on guitar and sing your heart out, just do it." But he came back with the song that you hear in the film, and it absolutely blew my mind. It was the most moving thing. Gorgeous.
It's amazing.
So beautiful. So beautiful. And he did that in one night with he got his friends over, and they just battered it out, and it's just gorgeous, you know. But yeah, so the saluting of magpies, yeah, it's a big one, that. Yeah. But birds there were so many birds I didn't use. It's such a shame, because I love the old bird thing with the, you know, each bird has its own sort of superstition attached to it. It's quite fascinating.
I love how the end of your film too has a film by Tom Lee Rutter and his friends.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's a collection of so many different friends I have, this film. Fellow filmmakers, just actual friends who just get roped in at gunpoint. And
I know actors.
That. Yeah, absolutely. It's a mixture of everything, really. So I just find, to me, it's just a tapestry of faces, and it's all friendly faces, whether it's my local friends or my filmmaker friends, my London friends, just a mixture of so many people coming together to make this film. And it wouldn't be possible without any of them. So even though I'm sort of batting it out at home, editing it together, it wouldn't be possible without the help of so many people. So I figured, you know what, this isn't all about me. This is about us all. So let's make this a film by me and my friends.
No, good on you. I love that credit. I love just I love the close of the movie. I love the whole thing about your film. I adore it. Can you tell people how they can? And by the way, just before I say that, I will put a link to the trailer in the film in the show notes, so people can check out the trailer if they want to go to the show notes wherever they're listening to or watching our conversation. But could you tell people where they can get a hold of you, or if they're interested in seeing what you're up to, or any URL
Absolutely.
or website you want to point them at?
Yeah, so I'm on all the socials, really. We have a page for Pocket Film of Superstitions on Facebook, so you can find Pocket Film of Superstitions on Facebook. You can find me on X and Instagram as Carney Films, or just type in my name, Tom Lee Rutter, and you can find me. So keep an eye out on the socials, and feel free to hit me up with a message.
Oh, fantastic. And people should come and check it out at MidWest WeirdFest, again, which runs the weekend, which is fast approaching us, March 1 to 3 at the Micon Downtown Cinema in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Anybody in the area should get to it, not just for Tom's film, which is incredible, but a range of weird cinema, which I think people are going to adore. And I can't thank you enough for letting us screen your amazing film at the festival, but also for coming on to Talking Weird and chatting to me, Tom.
It's been my absolute pleasure, and it's also a pleasure to let you guys have the US premiere of the film, which is the first time it's going to be screened over there. And so I just wish I could be there to share in the experience with you guys. I guess if I start walking now, I might just make it.
There you go. Maybe there's some superstition we're unaware of that can transport you to the other side of the planet if you throw salt over your shoulder and cross your fingers 3 times and say some name backwards in a mirror. But again, it was a great joy chatting to you, Tom. It's always a great joy talking to everybody out there listening as well. And until I get to talk to everybody again in the future, keep it weird.
Cheers.